So what I'm thinking of today is the overcorrection by the Fed. And what's first of all, what's the likelihood of an overcorrection? And if it's an overcorrection, how long will it take, and what's sort of the severity of the overcorrection? So the reason I'm thinking that there's an overcorrection is that there's two ways that the Fed can control the availability of money, because it's all about the availability of money. How much money is available for the consumer to spend? That basically determines the economy. And the two ways they do that, one is like we discussed in the previous vid, is with interest rates, with interest rates. And the other way that they do that is currently it's the reverse repo rate, not the repo rate, the reverse repo. So the reverse repo is basically a way for the Fed to remove liquidity out of the economy. So it's literally taking money and removing it from the economy. The money still exists, but they sort of keep it to themselves, if that makes sense. So with the stimulus that happened during COVID, on the one side of the economy, the Fed has been injecting cash by literally depositing the cash into people's pockets. And on the other side, they've been taking the cash out again via the reverse repo. Not the repo rate, the reverse repo. And so far, I think they've taken out almost $2 trillion they've taken out of the economy. And that's still increasing. So they're hiking interest rates as well as taking money from the economy. So my thought process, my question is, what's the delayed effect of each of those? So if they're hiking interest rates, how long will it be till we actually see the result in the economy of the interest rate hike? Obviously, there's existing debt that interest rates will affect, as well as possible new debt that obviously won't happen, because if people might not qualify for loans anymore because of the higher interest rate. So you are killing future debt that could be created. That's the one thing that the interest rate hike will technically affect. The other thing it will affect is current debt holders. These current debt holders, they will maybe get to a point where they aren't financially able to pay the loans, so they will start defaulting. So that's the two ways it can affect the availability of money. But what's the time frame we're looking at here? So if it does, let's say, affect new debts, it will be fairly instant, but what's the result of these new debts? So obviously there'll be less cars sold, less houses sold, and that can be a couple of weeks. And then existing debt, maybe people will attempt to do the current repayments, but they might only start defaulting in a month or two, because they might still have enough cash to go through the payments. The problem that we also have now is that we all know that there's a bit of a job problem in the US, where people just aren't applying for jobs. They've got enough cash in their pocket to not work. And the repaying debts might cause them to burn through their savings a lot quicker, which means they're going to have to go out and look for a job. But how long does that process take? If that's, let's say, 6 months, that means that if there's an interest rate change, that we'll only see the results of that change in 6 months. So if you hike it more often than 6 months, the likelihood of overcorrection is very, very high. So I think there's a very high likelihood that the Fed will actually overcorrect on interest rates. On the flip side of the coin, there's obviously the reverse repo, where the Fed is literally just selling assets. It's just what do they call that book? It's basically they're just basically getting rid of assets. So they're selling a lot of assets in like mortgages and stuff like that. They're just selling it so that they can get cash back in return. It's basically the asset cash balance in the economy that they want to affect. There's too many assets in the there's too much cash in the system and too little assets. So they are basically selling their own assets back into the system and obviously collecting cash to correct that balance. But what's the delayed effect of that on the economy? So this cash mostly comes from banks. That's where the banks obviously over time they are building up these volumes of cash, but I don't know where these cash come from. So that's maybe a question that someone can possibly answer in the comments, is where does this cash come from that the banks are, because the banks are buying assets from government. That's literally what's happening. But where they're getting this cash, because that will determine the delayed effect of the repo rate, the reverse repo rate. If there's, let's say we suddenly jump up with $1 trillion extra, let's say we go from 2 trillion to 3 trillion in the next day, there's obviously going to be some economical impact, but where are we going to see this? What's going to be the trigger, and how long will it be? Because that will also determine what the delayed reaction is going to be, and if the Fed is going to overcorrect. So basically what an overcorrection will do is an overcorrection will completely kill the economy. And I'm not sure if we will be able to... Oh, no, I have traffic here. Oh, this is a bad one. It's probably an accident. So I think the likelihood of an overcorrection is very, very high. And that will also mess with the time frame of how to predict the bottom of the market. Because if there is an overcorrection, there might be a secondary drop in the economy caused by the overcorrection that's going to prolong the bottom of the market. But then again, also the stock market does tend to be a little bit ahead of the economy, so maybe that won't actually affect the stock market that bad. But yeah, that's just my thoughts for today. Something to think about, and yeah, feel free to leave a comment and correct me if I'm wrong and give your insights. And maybe another question I also want to ask is, what other means do the Fed have of controlling money availability? But obviously there's the interest rates hikes, there's reverse repo agreements, and then there's monetary policy. What else do they have to control money availability? Because that's sort of where we should be looking if we want to determine the health of the economy. And yeah, if you want to join future discussions and you like this video, then please remember to hit like and subscribe. Until next time, ciao.